Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us on the Weather Channel. It is now 10 minutes before the hour. You've tuned in just in time for Storm Watch, and this edition of Storm Watch is sponsored by State Farm Insurance. We will watch those thunderstorms this morning over North and South Dakota. Severe thunderstorm warnings remain in effect for some of the counties in western South Dakota. Also, we have a cluster of storms in south central Illinois, continuing to move off toward the south. We'll show that to you on radar as well. Of course, a part of Storm Watch is the Tropical Update. So we'll begin this edition of our Storm Watch segment with the Tropical Update because there are several things we're watching for you across the Atlantic Basin, none of which is really that threatening, but certainly all of them bears watching. So we will definitely continue to watch them for you. We have been detecting here this upper level low over the northern Bahamas, another tropical wave here that has flared up tropical, or should I say thunderstorm activity just north of Puerto Rico, and another tropical wave here. And this one we think perhaps will be the most interesting one over the next 5 days or so. But let's take a look at each of the systems, beginning though with the upper level low here. Now we're not expecting this system to organize into a tropical storm or even a well-organized tropical system at all, but it will bring some very heavy rains across the northern Bahamas from the Cricket Island all the way to Nassau, Grand Bahama Island, Freeport, and the Florida Straits could eventually get some locally heavy rain as this upper level low continues to push off toward the west. Over the next 5 days or so, some of this moisture could eventually move into the Gulf and eventually push into Texas, where we could find more beneficial rains. So we'll continue to watch this upper level low for you. It will bring unsettled weather, but again, not an organized tropical system. We've been watching this weak wave developing over the Central Caribbean. It is not expected to develop over the next 24 hours. Now here are the next two waves that we have been watching very closely. This one is quite extensive. As you can see, it's extending from just off the coast here of South America northward to Puerto Rico, just north and east of Puerto Rico. And you can clearly see that the northern part of this particular wave has been the most active in terms of thunderstorm activity. It will perhaps bring some cloudy conditions and some thunderstorms across the central islands, but we are watching this closely. We have not had any low-level circulation detected from this particular system yet, but because it has so much convection with it, we will continue to watch it. It is in a sheared environment, so we're not talking about this system developing into a tropical storm, but it does bear watching, and of course we will watch it closely. Now this one, on the other hand, is a little more interesting, as we have noticed a broad area of low pressure, not only aloft but at the surface. We've detected about 1,010 millibar low pressure system from this, and you can see the broad counterclockwise rotation, and we're starting to see some convection, but the convection is not close to the center, so it shows that this system is not as organized as it could be, but it is over warm waters, and it does have some time to develop as it's a little farther out across the Atlantic. It is projected to perhaps take the same path that this one is taking. And again, we will watch it very, very closely for you. Here's a different look at that particular tropical wave, and another right behind it. It has a glob of convection with it as well. We're in the midst of hurricane season. We are only halfway through. We have another whole half to go. So we're talking about there's still a chance that we could get 9 named storms across the Atlantic Basin. In the Pacific, our tropical depression is over 480 miles east of Hilo, the big island of Hawaii. It is moving west at 12 miles an hour, and because it's moving due west, we think it'll mainly stay south of the islands. It could bring some higher seas and swells and maybe some shower activity to the islands, but this system is expected to dissipate as we go through the next 24 to 36 hours. That's a look at the tropics. Now a look at the threat for severe weather today. The Dakotas. Even across the northeast and the Ohio Valley, a surface cold front draped across this region. Preceding it, you can see the thunderstorms lining up here with this cluster over the central parts of Illinois. We'll talk more about this particular frontal boundary and its progression next on Weather Center.
The Northeast gets a brief break from yesterday's heavy rain and flooding, but scattered thunderstorms are possible in some areas. Where and when next on Weather Center.
This program was sponsored by State Farm Insurance. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
My mommy works really hard. She goes to work every day. She has to make money so we can buy stuff.
At State Farm, we understand how important your income is to your family's well-being.
Mom works so I can go to college.
Life is full of surprises. We'll help you develop a life insurance plan that isn't.
We need a lot of money.
State Farm understands life.
I'm a child and
Just in time for Storm Watch, 10 minutes before the top of each hour. Has some flash flood warnings in Uvalde and Zavala County. That's out west of San Antonio. Some severe weather in North Dakota. We'll cover that on Storm Watch. But first, we have a lot of developments that have become active, that have begun this morning in the tropics in the Atlantic. And for details on all of those, here's John Hope, our tropical specialist.
Thank you, Marshall. Right you are. We are seeing a more active tropic. So far, though, we don't see anything that's really developing into a storm or tropical depression, not quite yet. But we are examining an area here in the Gulf of Mexico, which seems to have a bit of a circulation. We have this upper low and upper and mid levels just off the coast of Florida. We have a tropical wave out here northeast of Puerto Rico, which has strengthened quite a bit in the last 24 hours. And we have a tropical wave out here about 1,500 miles east of the Caribbean. And we are monitoring all those. And while we're at it, we have a little disturbance down here in the Pacific side, south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec, which we'll have to watch. It might become a depression as well. Here in the Gulf of Mexico, right out in the middle of the Gulf, we have what appears to be a bit of a circulation. We're not seeing any big pressure falls or anything like that, but it does look like a low-level circulation is developing and it's drifting off to the west. That'll be something that we're going to have to monitor, too, as time goes by. There's that upper low that we followed for a long way now. It's approaching the Florida Straits in South Florida. And there are some pretty good showers with it. As yet, no sign of development. Now, as we indicated earlier, we have this tropical wave out here approaching Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. A little bit to the north of there, most of it is actually. But nevertheless, we have seen some pretty significant pressure falls there in the last 24 hours. In fact, looking now at the San Juan radar out of San Juan, we can see some very heavy showers out over the open Atlantic. Most of those so far are north of the islands, although they've had some pretty good showers around St. Croix and St. Thomas this morning, even some thunderstorms. And some of that, as you can see, is rotating and approaching Puerto Rico. So these pressure falls are pretty significant out there. They're in the order of 3.5 millibars in 24 hours. And when we ever see that big a fall, then we watch it very carefully. Now here it is on the satellite picture once again. You can see this is all drifting off to the west, and possibly, if this continues to look a little bit ominous, it'll be examined by a reconnaissance aircraft tomorrow. Now the other tropical wave, which we've been talking about, is pretty far out in the Atlantic. It's about 1,500 miles east of the islands, moving westward 15 miles an hour or so. That appears to be getting a little better organized, and there's a possibility anyway that a depression might form out there in the next 24 hours or so. That's just something that we're going to have to watch rather carefully. Here's a visible picture of that, and it's got quite a ways to go before it really gets organized around the center. It's quite a large circulation, but it's lacking organization around the center. And until we see that, we're not going to be all that concerned about it. Now, as we look farther east, we have yet another tropical wave that sort of attracted our attention. Right here, due south of the Cape Verde Islands, there's a wave that's about 40 degrees west out ahead. So that's another area that shows some evidence of a weak circulation, and we'll have to see how that behaves as it goes on farther toward the west. Well, on the Pacific side, that tropical depression we have out by Hawaii is really not of any consequence. We don't have to worry much about that. It's centered now about 410 miles south-southeast of Hilo, Hawaii, and whatever is left there is going to go well south of the Hawaiian Islands. I don't think you can really say it's going to affect it at all. It's moving toward the west at 17. The top winds are only 30 miles per hour. And as you look at a satellite picture out there, we can barely see any evidence of it anymore. So it's a very weak system. If you're going to Hawaii, don't worry about it at all. It's really not going to affect you even the least bit. There are the remnants of Georgette, just a low-level swirl about to disappear. Well, Marshall has some severe weather and some heavy rain back here in the States to talk to you about, so here's Marshall.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we've got a couple of swirls of our own over the lower 48 states. One of them notably down over the Big Bend area of Texas and the Rio Grande River. Upper level low here causing some flooding rains to fall. And monsoonal moisture pumping northward with some rain up around Ogden in Utah. And Minnesota, we've had rain this morning and thunderstorms, another batch of thunderstorms around Cairo, Illinois. And out east, out ahead of a frontal zone, more showers and thunderstorms. You start overlaying the lightning images and you can see where they are. Also, look at this little trough that's laying off the coast of the Carolinas now, stirring up some rain showers and thunderstorms around Jacksonville and Brunswick, Georgia. Now, those are all going to be strong thunderstorms at times later this afternoon, especially when you get daytime heating involved in it. But here's the area where we expect severe weather again, as we did yesterday. And indeed, we've had 4 or 5 severe thunderstorm warnings in effect as a line moved across North Dakota. We'll have more details on that and on the flooding in St. Louis from morning rains coming up on Weather Center.
Thunderstorms threaten the northern plains while flooding is the problem in parts of Texas. Will your day be a washout? Find out on Weather Center after your local forecast.
There are some people who prefer to be left in the dark. But if you prefer the light, you need a Honda generator. They're easy to start, efficient, and quiet. But best of all, they're reliable.
Honda. That thing always work. Always.
Honda generators are available at a dealer near you.
Planning a special event?
Storm Watch will tell you about the threat of some flooding in the southeast in Texas and also the threat of some severe weather. But that's coming up after your tropical update, and for that we have Steve Lyons standing by.
Well, thank you, Jill. And tonight we have the tropics very active, consistent with the long-term climatology. We're getting some very active tropical weather across the Atlantic Basin and into the Gulf of Mexico tonight. Here's a long loop, and I'll show you a couple of features we're going to be looking at. First, in the Gulf of Mexico, we're starting to develop a surface low out in here, right underneath some thunderstorm activity we'll have to keep an eye on. Right now, the winds are very, very weak, but we'll keep an eye on that. We had been monitoring the upper level low. That's over the Florida Straits right now and moving to the west, no big deal. But that tropical wave, the northern edge of it, the last 24 hours has really flared up. You can see it here, and it continues to move to the west, just north of Puerto Rico now. There's no surface center yet, but it's getting close to it, and we have pretty good thunderstorm activity there. I'll show you that on the radar. Caribbean Sea thunderstorm activity, but not too much going on. And then out in the Atlantic Basin, this very large tropical low moving to the west very steadily with still some thunderstorm activity. So let's look more closely at each of these features. The Gulf of Mexico, right down in here, we have a very weak surface low, and you can see on top of it thunderstorm activity. Right now, winds are only about 5 to 10 miles an hour. Very little hint of any development at this stage. Pressures are still relatively high. But we'll keep an eye on that one the next 24 hours because it's relatively close to home for some of you. Down in the Caribbean, you can see a lot of thunderstorm activity here, typical of the tropical season, but right now, not much in the way of development in the Gulf, into the Caribbean Sea. Out in here, you can see this system starting to come into view, and let's get a close-up view of this. Sun's starting to go down out there, but here's this tropical wave, and now a very nice signature here in the way of development. It's looking a lot better than it was yesterday, and we see a lot of thunderstorm activity co-located with where a surface center might form. You can see San Juan, Puerto Rico is right up here, the Puerto Rico Islands, the islands here. It's passing Puerto Rico tonight, should continue on a west to west-northwest track, generally heading toward the Bahamas. We'll have to keep a very close eye on this. You can see here's the San Juan radar here. The actual radar site is up in the mountains about here, but you can see the circulation arcing across consistent with a weak tropical low there, or at least a wave axis. Now as we go farther out into the Atlantic, here comes this very big low out here. And you can see the sun is setting here, but I wanted you to see some of this thunderstorm starting to develop on the north side of this system. Very large system. The center is about in the area where there is no thunderstorm activity, which is about here on the infrared image. You can see still near the center there is no thunderstorm activity, which is good news, because as long as there's no thunderstorms near the center, chances for development are not too good. But we'll have to watch this very carefully, because as it moves to the west, the environment is a little more favorable for development of thunderstorm activity, and this is a very large system. The system north of Puerto Rico will just about fit in the center of this void of cloud right here. So we'll have to keep an eye on this one very closely. Also, another tropical wave's come off the coast of Africa. Here it is right here, and it has a lot of thunderstorm activity right over the top of a low-level circulation there. And so that's another one we're going to look at as well. So very, very active the last 24 hours in the tropics, and that'll continue to be that way. We have a tropical depression C1 out in the Pacific just to the south of Hawaii. Wind still 30 miles per hour, but if we look on the satellite imagery here, there it is right there, and really not much to speak of. Won't affect the islands at all. Elsewhere in the tropical Pacific, we've got some thunderstorm activity along what we call the monsoon trough of low pressure, and we have a surface circulation starting to form about 150 to 200 miles south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But right now it's the Atlantic Basin's turn. But now let's get back to Jill and see what she's got going with severe weather and flooding in the United States.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We do have some strong thunderstorms around. We haven't had a whole lot of severe weather today, but some thunderstorms that have put down as much as 6 inches of rain in maybe less than an hour's time in northeast Georgia. So while we don't expect to see a lot of severe weather, we've had heavy enough rain in Greene County for flooding. A flood warning does remain in effect. Also in Texas, now thunderstorms developing across much of the state, and that gives us the chance of some relief from the drought, but maybe a little too much relief. Flooding has been a problem around Cephallus County here in the southern part of the state. But again, more widespread thunderstorms, so not all bad. Along and ahead of our cold front here in the northeast, it's gotten a little more active. New York City to Philadelphia. Watch out for some strong thunderstorms and heavy rain for your evening commute. And then again down the southeast, the heavy rain. One radar here shows you New York City. How do you do it? You're right in the middle, but not getting rained on at the moment. That probably won't last. Stick with us and we'll tell you what's coming up after these thunderstorms pass, and you'll probably like that a little bit better. That's next.
Another round of rain is moving through the northeast as well as South Texas. Find out where and when the rain is likely ahead on Weather Center after your local forecast.
Seems I'm late for our little reception. No worries. I'm driving this new Subaru Outback. Shortcut. It's got full-time all-wheel drive, like my other Outback, so I can take it almost anywhere, like my other Outbacks. In fact, there's only one difference, really. Matilda.
Severe thunderstorms in the northern plains, a report of one tornado earlier today. A severe thunderstorm warning in effect for South Florida. Rain is leaving the northeast, and the heat is on in the plains. I am Dave Schwartz with this edition of Storm Watch. But first off, new doings in the tropics. Our tropical update leads the way. Now, we are having some heavy rain that's moving through South Florida here tonight. This is tropical moisture, but it is not in association with a tropical disturbance. Nevertheless, this line of thunderstorms is estimated to be producing winds gusting to 55 miles per hour. So from Key Largo to Key West, be prepared for some, well, just get inside if you're not inside right now. And if you're not inside, what are you watching the Weather Channel? Stay inside, get the kids inside here too. Here in Miami, we had a wind gust of 40 miles an hour. Gusty, heavy tropical showers. That's the story here. But as I said, not a function of a tropical system. This was a function of an upper level area of low pressure. Watch it last 2 days. There it goes. Across the Bahamas and then into South Florida here today. That's what this is all about. This will continue to retrograde toward the west out over the Gulf of Mexico here tomorrow, and maybe we'll have a little drier air here in Florida. But there are a couple of areas of concern here, tropical-wise. 1, 2, and 2.5. There's actually an area of low pressure out here in the Gulf of Mexico. It is being sheared by some strong winds from the north. It is drifting westward slowly here too. So it's going to be running out of real estate, and by real estate, it'll be running out of warm water over which to sit. So even if something does develop here, it will probably move into Mexico in the next day and a half or 2 days, and that would be it. These are the big thunderstorms here in western Florida. How about that drenching you had in Fort Myers and Sanibel a couple hours ago? Phew, that is moving offshore. Now we get to the tropical entities, and you'll notice these clouds heading straight north. They're on the east side of this trough of low pressure that is right in here that's spinning the moisture back into Florida. So the western half of this thing has just gotten sheared apart here today. This was the tropical disturbance that the National Hurricane Center decided to fly a reconnaissance plane into. As that approached Puerto Rico, it looked pretty good. Then it weakened this evening. Now we're still seeing some puffs and a circulation, a cyclonic circulation. It appears as if the center of whatever is there is off to the northwest of San Juan. It's moving westward, closer to Santo Domingo and Cuba and potentially the United States. So we'll keep a close eye on this, but it has gotten no stronger than it was this time last night. But look at this blob here. We've been monitoring this ever since it moved off the coast of Africa several days ago. Still about 1,000 miles to the east of the islands. When I say it, I'm talking about low pressure that has been located right in here. You'll notice the puffs here too. That's where we think the surface low pressure area is, though there's still a lot of showers on the east side of this. This is still relatively unorganized. So, number one, as that moves away from Puerto Rico, and then here, once again, is number two, this color-enhanced imagery with the surface low somewhere in here as that drifts toward the west. So we'll see. Tropical depression, either one of those possible in the next day or two. And then off the coast of Africa, another area of shower activity, and that's your tropical update here in the Atlantic. Now in the Pacific, we've had several tropical storms and hurricanes already. This one is neither. It is a tropical depression and barely so. Winds 30 miles per hour, maximum sustained. Moving west at 18 miles an hour. The sun is going down on TD1C as it makes its way out of the picture. Way south of Hawaii. No problems for us here on the Big Island. You'll notice the trade winds coming in from the northeast, some puffy clouds and mauka showers out there on the eastern slopes of Hawaii. A couple of areas of disturbed weather, one south of Cabo San Lucas being monitored for development, and it looks like this baby is getting ready to go here south of Gulf of Tehuantepec. Neither of these is organized right now. So that's your tropical update. Now back to the United States. We've had that heavy rain here in the northeast, gone. Heavy rain here in South Florida and South Georgia, that's not gone yet. Heavy rain here